naming him, criticised by the media, some members of this parliament for naming him 13 times. I think yesterday I named him only once. So give credit where it's due. In relation to his concerns with the IMF, Mr. Speaker, where he alleges that no numbers were tabled, in my statement yesterday, I think that took 30 minutes, all comments referred to in my statement yesterday, you can find from the IMF website. So all the numbers are there if you care to follow up. So everything that I've said, Mr. Speaker, can be substantiated. In relation to his question, when can we support some of my statements with numbers? Well, as he knows, the final budget outcome is due at the end of March. We're now in February, so obviously I could not provide you those numbers, but I provided you numbers that we have at Treasury at this point in time. And Mr. Speaker, I look forward in the March session to providing, as always, a detailed assessment of how we tracked last year. And of course, as I mentioned in my budget speech yesterday, we did very well. And I would hope that the former Prime Minister commended us for some of the positive things we did. We did very well in controlling expenditure. As I said, possibly the only country in the world that had expenditure below a budgeted level. So that's what we'll do. I'll wait for that report and I'll table it in the next session of Parliament. And I thank the Honourable Member for his keen interest with the IMF. For many years, as he knows, being a Member of Parliament, there didn't seem to be much interest with the IMF until this government took place. And since then, Mr. Speaker, I've tried my best to engage with them. Why? Because dealing with the IMF, not only do we have an independent source that monitors what we do as a government, especially in the financial sector, but their opinions and their reports affect our relationship with all other multilateral partners. And Mr. Speaker, I think no one can disagree in terms of revenue, in terms of revenue and sourcing good, cheap concessional financing. That is not possible unless the IMF endorses it, Mr. Speaker. So I'm very happy that he's now interested with the IMF. And as it relates to the staff monitored program, Mr. Speaker, let me just give us a quick rundown on that. It's been nearly 20 years since our governments have dealt with the IMF, and I'm very happy, as I've said so many times on the floor of this Parliament, we have engaged with them on a very sincere and genuine basis. The staff monitored program, which we agreed with the IMF when we came in, had come to an end in June 2021 last year. And as I advised this House last year in the first part, I think in April, around 75% of our then 31 KPIs were completed. And as a result of that, we then agreed to a further set of additional 12 KPIs, of which, Mr. Speaker, at the end of last year, we had met 10 of those, and 2 of those were not met. And these were...
Honorable Treasurer, you talk KPI, our planning will harim, nalno sa winem KPI.
Yeah, key performance indicators, okay, Mr. Speaker, or benchmarks set by the IMF that, or set by ourselves in agreement with the IMF where we had, we were trying to achieve. So the 2 benchmarks or KPIs that weren't met were our non-tax revenue administration bill, which we were required to pass by this Parliament, that was meant to be passed last year in November. We're hoping to have it passed in this session, but hopefully that can come on the floor in March. And the second part was that the IRC were meant to present an approved and costed work plan for implementation, and that is still forthcoming. But apart from those two, Mr. Speaker, we then entered into a new program with the IMF this year, due to be completed by May. From my last briefing with discussions with the IMF on Tuesday last week, we're on target to complete 100% of that, after which we will then enter into, hopefully, 3 programs over 3 years. And this is what they call an extended credit facility, where if we can complete that successfully, we are subjected to receive about $368 million US, or about 1.2 billion kina, as part of our financing plan. So that's what we're doing with the IMF. In relation to the conditions, Mr. Speaker, that the member had referred to, these, as I mentioned earlier, key performance indicators, or KPIs, they are set by our government. They are not set by the IMF. I want to make that very clear, Mr. Speaker, and so I don't think there should be too much concerns with that. In relation to their opinion on a wage blowout, and in relation to their opinion on debt, well, Mr. Speaker, every single budget that the Marape Basil government has passed since 2019 has been endorsed by the IMF, has been endorsed by our multilateral partners, all of which includes those debt numbers you mentioned, 52 million for this year. 52 million for this year. So that's their opinion on it. If they weren't comfortable with that debt, they would not have endorsed our budgets. But I think the main point here in our discussions with the IMF and other multilateral partners and our bilateral partners is that the main point, what they're looking for, Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned so often, is to ensure that we can maintain that debt. And so they're looking for what's called fiscal consolidation, ensuring that our deficit continues to reduce. And if you look at our 13-year fiscal plan, which we had demonstrated, Mr. Speaker, not only have we provided a clear plan for fiscal consolidation, reducing deficit over the next 13 years, for the first time in our history, our government, if still in office, will provide an option to clear all sovereign debts from all governments by 2034. Mr. Speaker, there were so many other questions, as I mentioned, that the member gave me here. As I was trying to write them, I lost count. So if I've missed some others, I'd ask the honourable member to shoot me some questions, and I'm happy to provide him further detailed and accurate answers to this floor. Thank you.
Honourable members, for 5 minutes long, ask him in Nogat Tok Sabe, finish, long time finish, so you now. Mr. Clark. Oh, Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I seek leave of the Chair to make a brief statement. Or personal explanation. Is leave granted? Mr. Speaker, yesterday during question time, the member for North Fly raised a series of questions to the Minister of Petroleum. The questions were in relation to the recent signing of the Pinyan gas agreement between the Minister and the project partners ExxonMobil, Santos and Nippon. Mr. Speaker, the member for North Fly's questions were in relation to the following issues: lack of no consultation by the state with the people of North Fly and Western Province, the license PRL3 had expired 6 years ago, and whether the Petroleum Advisory Board approved the APDL lodged by ExxonMobil. Mr. Speaker, at this point, I raised a point of order. Mr. Speaker, if you recall, your response was that you were not aware of the issues raised before the court and ruled my point of order out of order and directed the member for North Fly continue with his questions. The member of North Fly then asked the minister if he can confirm or deny the gas agreement that he signed yesterday was null and void when they know the law is broken. Further, has the PAB approved it? Mr. Speaker, the Minister for Provincial Affairs and former Attorney General consequently raised a further point of order, raising the same point that the questions raised by the member of North Fly is raising are the very subject concerning the license is before the court, and he can't use Parliament to raise questions on the same question he raised before the court. Mr. Speaker, you put the question to the member of North Fly that you would not entertain any questions raised by the member that he raised before the court. Mr. Speaker, the member of North Fly responded claiming none of the members know what the issues before the court are, and that the questions he raised are, and I quote, not even before the court, unquote. Mr. Speaker, based on the member of North Fly's response, you allowed him to continue with this questioning. Mr. Speaker, I provided you a copy of an actual document submitted by counsel acting for the member of North Fly, addressed to the Register of National Court, and relied on in court to obtain an interim stay order, which I now have in my hand. Mr. Speaker, you will note that the issues raised in this document are in fact the same issues raised by the member for North Fly in his proceedings before the court, as well as on the floor of Parliament. Mr. Speaker, evidence proves that the questions raised by the member of North Fly were in fact the same issues raised before the National Court proceedings filed by himself. Mr. Speaker, I submit it is beyond question of doubt that the member of North Fly is guilty of lying and misleading Parliament. Mr. Speaker, misleading Parliament is a serious matter. Holders of public office should be truthful. As a member of National Parliament, his conduct caught lying is an embarrassment not only to the country, but the people of North Fly. Mr. Speaker, I request that the member of North Fly issue an apology to this honourable House and the people of North Fly for his dishonourable conduct of knowingly being dishonest and misleading Parliament. Thank you.
Personal statement from Minister. Elect Lugal Sam, that's all. Me yet Lucia. Me ask him straight, honorable member, you talk true also question you will raise him ya. You know one kind lo you raise him lo court. Now I'm dog you know one kind. So that's why me issue way come up na I'm all talk also. You me all honorable leaders. You may not talk, you may must not can talk yaman, lo desfla flow. Plenty time you may say make him, now you may get away doing it. So, no good as a statement, you know that too, lo desfla. So I'm statement and finish. You may now come to our business from Parliament, Mr. Clark.
Private business. Notice number 294. Parliamentary Members Retirement Benefits Amendment Bill 2021. Message from the Governor General from 20th January.
Honourable members, I have to announce that I have received a message from His Excellency the Governor General dated 22nd February 2022, recommending the expenditure of public monies in accordance with Section 210 of the Constitution insofar as the bill relates to and provides for such expenditure. Minister for Treasury.
Mr. Speaker, Section 111 of the Constitution affords all members of Parliament the right to introduce bills on the floor of Parliament. subject to restrictions within the Constitution and standing orders. Whilst it is usually bills that emanate from the government that become enacted, members of Parliament who are not ministers may also introduce bills and propose laws through the exercise of this constitutional right. The chairman of the Parliamentary Members' Retirement Benefits Committee and the committee itself has put in a great effort into overseeing the management of the Parliamentary Members' Retirement Benefits Fund. They have also considered our existing legislation regarding retirement benefits and proposed amendments to the Parliamentary Members' Retirement Benefits Act of 1997. Mr. Speaker, the amendments proposed will increase pension benefits for members of Parliament, include a special pension benefit for former speakers of Parliament, and correct drafting errors in the Principal Act. Sponsored by the Honourable Chris Haiveta, Governor for Gulf, as a private member's bill this year, on the 20th of January 2022, the Parliamentary Members' Retirement Benefits Amendment Bill 2022 was introduced and supported by this Parliament up to its second reading stage. However, considering this is a money bill or a bill that will require expenditure, which is an executive initiative, it could not proceed to its third reading without a message from the Governor-General under Section 210 of our Constitution. So, Mr. Speaker, further considering that the bill has the support of this House up to this stage, this government, through the Minister for Treasury, will now assume responsibility of the Parliamentary Members' Retirement Benefits Amendment Bill 2022 from here on. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I ask leave of the Parliament to move the third reading forthwith.
Is leave granted? Mr. Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill be now read a third time.
The question is that the question be now put. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. The question is that the bill be now read a third time. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. Mr. Clerk.
Third reading. A bill for an act to amend the Parliamentary Members' Retirement Benefits Act 1997.
Mr. Clerk.
Notice number 306, Mr. Kobe Bomarea, member for Tewa Siasi.
Member for Tewa Siasi.
Mr. Speaker, I present the Lutheran, Evangelical Lutheran Church of Papua New Guinea Amendment Bill 2022.
Mr. Clerk.
First reading. A bill for an act to amend the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Papua New Guinea Act 1991 to provide for better clarity for the operation and management of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Papua New Guinea and for related purposes.
Member for TVWAN.
Mr. Speaker, I move that a bill be now read a second time.
Make your speech.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for giving me this opportunity to present to this Honorable House and the people of Papua New Guinea this important bill entitled Evangelical Lutheran Church of Papua New Guinea Amendment Bill 2022. Mr. Speaker, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Papua New Guinea, or in short ELCPNG, is governed by the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Papua New Guinea Act 1991. Since its passage in this Honorable House in 1991, no amendment has been made to the Act in the last 31 years. This is despite a number of administrative and structural changes that the church has undergone. Mr. Speaker, the ELC Papua New Guinea is the second largest Christian church in Papua New Guinea after the Catholic Church, with rich history tracing back to 1986. With such long history, the church has, over the last 145 years, contributed immensely in the social and spiritual development of this country through its many policies and the programs which complement the government's developmental goals. Mr. Speaker, the influence of the ELC, or Evangelical Lutheran Church, in this country is reflected in its growing Christian population, almost 2 million Lutherans, and the delivery of health and education services in this country, particularly in Momase and Highlands regions. In the last 45 years, the growth of the ELC-PNG has expanded into other parts of the country, including the New Guinea Islands region and the southern region, particularly the Northern Province, Milne Bay Province, Central Province, NCD, Gulf, and Western Province. Mr. Speaker, the ELC-PNG has a long history of 145 years in this wonderful and beautiful country of ours. It has delivered both spiritual and social services to our people. The ELC-PNG was one of the first churches to bring the light of Christian to our people, particularly in the Momase and Highlands regions. Through its health and education services, it has saved many thousands of lives and educated many Papua New Guineans. Many of our great leaders, both in the government and the private sectors, were and are Lutheran educated and in these Lutheran schools. Mr. Speaker, with such growth and expansion and many other changes occurring globally, there is a need for the church to amend its law to effectively administer its policies and programs in the social and spiritual space in this country. Hence, the church, through its council and the synod, or the National Conference, approved the amendment of the ELC-PNG Act. This approval was given in the 2016, 2018, 2020, and 2022 synod. Mr. Speaker, as a faithful Lutheran and a believer in the triumph of God, I was privileged to participate in the ELC-PNG 33rd synod held recently in Port Moresby from the 9th to the 14th of January 2022. I witnessed the endorsement of the synod for me to bring this bill to the Parliament. I am therefore honored and privileged to present this bill to the Parliament on behalf of the ELC Papua New Guinea and its faithful followers. Mr. Speaker, the specific objectives of the bill are as follows. Point 1, correction to certain names and figures to reflect the church's growth and expansion. Point 2, clear statement on the head of the church. Point 3, statement on the church executives and their terms in office. Point 4, statement on the church synod. 5, amalgamation of the SETS department into sector boards. And last point, statement on the incorporated SETS instrumentalities. Mr. Speaker, the bill contains 5 provisions, and they are: Provision 1. Section 1 introduces the term head in front of the term bishop to demarcate the office from other bishops and redefines the term board to align it with the current changes. Section 2 introduces 2 additional provisions. Section 2A, which declares that the Lord Jesus Christ is the head of the church, and Section 2B declares the objectives of the ELC-PNG. Number 3, Section 3, the Section 7 introduces an additional provisions, Section 7A, which captures the composition of the church executive and their term in office. 4, Section 7 defines the principal functions of the church secretary. And finally, Section 14 introduces 4 additional provisions. Section 14A provides for the synod. Section 14B provides for 4 sector boards. The Section 14C and 14D provides for the SETS incorporated instrumentalities. Mr. Speaker, this bill, when enacted by this Honorable House, will reflect the administrative and structural changes that ELC-PNG is currently undergoing, and will provide for effective delivery of the education, economical needs and social services, especially in the health and education sector. B, improve consistency and continuity in the SETS administration through effective assessment process. C, strengthen the SETS unity by centralizing the management of its assets and instrumentalities. D, reduces wastage and duplications of roles through the amalgamation of its departments into manageable sectors. E, complement the government's vision to declare PNG a Christian country in the national constitution. F, enhances the implementation of the ELC-PNG Vision 2020-2030, which complements the government's Vision 2050, the MTD3, and will drive the Marabe Basu government's agenda to take back PNG. Mr. Speaker, I must also stress that the ELC-PNG bill fits in perfectly with the vision of this government to take back PNG and to make PNG the richest black Christian nation in the world by ensuring that the SETS provides the leadership that is focused on its people and in line with the current government's objectives, especially in delivery of health and education services. Mr. Speaker, at this juncture, I would like to, on behalf of the head bishop of the ELC Papua New Guinea, Right Reverend Jack Uraime, and his executives, the ELC-PNG SETS Council, and 2 million Lutherans throughout the country, thank the Prime Minister Honorable James Marape for assuring the SETS of his and Marape Basu government support to the ELC-PNG. At the recent 33rd Synod, our Honorable Prime Minister publicly acknowledged and acknowledged the contribution of ELC-PNG to growth of this great country. We welcome the Prime Minister's support to the ELC-PNG and our other churches in the country. Mr. Speaker, finally, let me thank you for giving me this opportunity to present this important bill to this Honorable House. I seek the support of all members in enacting this bill. I therefore recommend the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Papua New Guinea amended Bill 2020 to this Honorable House. Thank you.
The question is that the question be put. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. The question is that the bill be now read a second time. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. Mr. Clerk.
Second reading. a bill for an act to amend the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Papua New Guinea Act 1991 to provide for better clarity for the operation and management of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Papua New Guinea and for related purposes.
Member for TVWAN.
Mr. Speaker, I ask leave of the Parliament to move the third reading forthwith.
Is leave granted? Leave granted. Member for TVWAN.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill be now read a third time.
The question is that the question be now put. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. The question is that the bill be now read a third time. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. Mr. Clerk.
Third reading, a bill for an act to amend Evangelical Lutheran Church of Papua New Guinea Act 1991 to provide for better clarity for the operation and management of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Papua New Guinea and for related purposes.
Mr. Clerk.
Notice number 307, Mr. Kobe Bomarel. Second one. Number.
Speaker, I present the Lutheran University of Papua New Guinea Bill 2022.
Mr. Clerk.
First reading, a bill for an act to repeal the Lutheran University Act 2014 and provide for the establishment and incorporation of a university to be known as the Lutheran University of Papua New Guinea and for related purposes.
Member for TVWAN.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill be now read a second time.
Make your speech.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, thank you for giving me this another opportunity to present to this Honorable House and the people of Papua New Guinea this important bill entitled Lutheran University of Papua New Guinea Bill 2022. Mr. Speaker, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Papua New Guinea is a Christian organization established under Evangelical Lutheran Church of Papua New Guinea Act 1991. The ELC-PNG as a church was first established in 1886 and has been operating in the country for the last 145 years. The ELC-PNG has a membership of approximately 2 million Lutherans, making it the second largest church in the country after Catholic Church. The ELC-PNG provides spiritual and social services to its members and the wider community through its pastoral, health, education, and business activities. Mr. Speaker, the ELC-PNG has been desirous for establishing its own university to provide a pathway for the students who attended Lutheran primary, Lutheran high school, and Lutheran secondary schools throughout the country. About 20 years ago, ELC-PNG formally agreed to establish its own university, owned and managed by it. Thus, the idea of a Lutheran university was mooted and endorsed by the church. In 2006, through the support of the National Parliament, the Lutheran University of Papua New Guinea Act 2006 was enacted. However, in May 2007, the ELC-PNG resolved not to support the act because of serious issues relating to the ownership, control, and management of the university and church properties, land and institutions and assets in bracket. Mr. Speaker, the ELC-PNG resolved in its 2008 synod to adopt a new legislation to replace the Lutheran University Act 2006. In the 2010 synod, the ELC-PNG reaffirmed its decision to repeal the Lutheran University Act 2006 and replace it with the Lutheran University of Papua New Guinea Bill 2012. The bill was developed over 4 years and approved by the ELC-PNG for presentation to the Parliament. Mr. Speaker, The bill was enacted into law in 2012. However, before the act would be implemented for some unknown reasons and without the approval of the ELC-PNG, the Parliament repealed the Lutheran University of Papua New Guinea Act 2012 in 2014 with Act number 55 of 2014. This act in 2014 did not replace the 2012 Act with a new legislation. There was therefore a flaw in the law. Mr. Speaker, the ELC-PNG has now resolved to repeal the Lutheran University Act 2014 and replace it with Lutheran University of Papua New Guinea Bill 2022. Mr. Speaker, it is in its 33rd synod held here in Port Moresby from 9 to 14 January 2020, the ELC-PNG synod reaffirmed its position to repeal 2014 Act and replace it with Lutheran University of Papua New Guinea Bill 2022. Mr. Speaker, the key features of the bill include the following. Point 1, that the Lutheran University is a private, shared-owned and operated university, similar to TVWAN University and Pacific Adventist University. Point 2, a very clear and transparent administrative structure must be in place. Point 3, very clear powers and functions of the university and the ELC-PNG in the management and operation of the university. And point 4, a clear system for check and balances has to be in place. The bill clearly positions the ELC-PNG as the main owner, manager, and funder of the Lutheran University. Mr. Speaker, I was privileged to participate fully in 33rd Synod here in Port Moresby early this year, and I am therefore privileged and honored to be endorsed by the ELC-PNG Synod to present this bill before this House. Mr. Speaker, at the 33rd Synod, the Department of Higher Education, Research, Science and Technology formally delivered a certificate of accreditation to the ELC-PNG, recognizing the establishment of the Lutheran Institute of Higher Learning. The Lutheran Institute of Higher Learning is therefore now established under the Higher and Technical Research Reform Act 2020 and the Higher Education General Provision Act 2014. The passage of the Lutheran University of Papua New Guinea Bill 2022 will cement the LILH as a university. Mr. Speaker, at this juncture, I would like to, on behalf of the head bishop of ELC-PNG, Right Reverend Uraime, and his executives, the ELC-PNG Church Council, and the 2 million faithful Lutherans, thank the Marabe Basel government through DHERS for granting and recognizing the Lutheran University higher learning. The passage of this bill will also affirm our Prime Minister's promise to ELC-PNG at its 32nd Synod in Buana, Morobe Province, in January 2020, that he will support the ELC-PNG to establish the Lutheran University. Mr. Speaker, although the university will be called the Lutheran University, it will open to every citizen of Papua New Guinea and overseas students, similar to TVWAN University and Pacific Adventist University. It will owned and managed by the Lutheran Church with academic programs open to every eligible student in the country. Mr. Speaker, the establishment of Lutheran University will also ease the pressure on the government, as it will be an institute of higher education, higher learning, providing diplomas and higher degrees, including masters and PhDs. The Lutheran University will be the third church-owned and operated university apart from TVWAN University and Pacific Adventist University. Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned above, the Lutheran Church has already been given the approval by the government through DHERS to establish this institution. The passage of this bill into law will complement the certificate that the university has just received. Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to present this important bill to this honorable House, and I seek the support of all members for the passage of this very important bill. I therefore now recommend the Lutheran University of Papua New Guinea Bill 2022 to this Honorable House. Thank you.
The question is that the question be now put. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. The question is that the bill be now read a second time. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. Mr. Clerk.
Second reading, a bill for an act to repeal the Lutheran University Act 2014 and provide for the establishment and incorporation of a university to be known as the Lutheran University of Papua New Guinea and for related purposes.
Member for Te Waiasiasi.
Mr. Speaker, I ask leave of the Parliament to move the third reading forthwith.
Is leave granted? Leave granted. Member for Te Waiasiasi.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill be now read a third time.
The question is that the question be now put. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. The question is that the bill be now read a third time. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. Thank you, Honourable Member. Mr. Clerk.
Third reading, a bill for an act to repeal the Lutheran University Act 2014 and provide for the establishment and incorporation of a university to be known as the Lutheran University of Papua New Guinea and for related purposes.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Mr. Clerk.
Notice number 313, Mr. Alan Bed, member for East Sepik Provincial.
Member for East Sepik Provincial.
Mr. Speaker, I present the Criminal Code Amendment Bill 2022.
Mr. Clerk.
First reading, a bill for an act to amend the Criminal Code Act, Chapter 262 and for related purposes.
Member for East Sepik Provincial.
Mr. Speaker, I ask leave of the Parliament to move the second reading forthwith.
Is leave granted? Leave granted. Member for East Sepik Provincial.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill be now read a second time.
Make your speech.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. By way of background, there has been a lot of violence, particularly against women and girls who are accused of sorcery-related incidents. This Glassman bill is a proposed amendment to the Criminal Code. It is intended to address sorcery accusation-related violence, or SARV for short, by criminalizing the act of practicing as a glassman or glassmary, the use of glassman or glassmary and other related acts. This bill will amend the Criminal Code Act and add a Division 4 to Part 7, preparation to commit offences, conspiracy, accessories after the fact, and the said Subdivision 4, acting like or purporting to be a glassman or glassmary, will include paragraphs 520A through to 520G. Over the past decade, the use of glassman or glassmary in order to falsely identify individuals accused of sorcery have been on the dramatic rise in our country as we have seen from many social media shared incidents around our country. A large majority of these SARV cases involve the use of a glass man or glass Mary to falsely accuse someone of sorcery. The accused are usually widows, women, and girls. The women and girls are usually then subjected to extreme acts of violence, torture, rape, and many are eventually killed once a confession is extracted under extreme pain. It has been found that in most cases, glassmen actually receive a payment for these services. And so these acts are motivated by greed. Further, in the experience of many NGOs, such as the Papua New Guinea Tribal Foundation and others who work tirelessly and extensively in this area, none of the more than 200 individuals who have been rescued after being accused were actually found to be sorcerers. They were not sorcerers at all. Addressing SARV and ending this barbaric practice will take a number of important and bold actions. This action of amending the criminal code through legislative reform is the first of those bold actions, and is directly aimed at individuals who not only propagate sorcery accusation-related violence, but furthermore, inappropriately benefit from the torture and murder of innocent and defenseless men, women, and children. They are in fact con artists who destroy lives, communities, and the reputation of our supposedly Christian nation. PNG must not allow these serial killers to continue to operate as they please. This bill will criminalize the following actions. Any person who directly or indirectly seeks to employ the use of a glass man or a glass Mary is guilty of an offense. Any person who uses a glass man or glass Mary and threatens to use these services against someone else is guilty of an offense. Any person who sells their services as a glass man or glass Mary is guilty of an offense. These offenses will be punishable by a fine of 10,000 kina or 10 years in prison or both. The following exceptions will be made subject to Section 19 of the Criminal Code and will involve the following. A glass man or glass Mary who accuses a minor, a child under 12, an elderly or infirm person, I beg your pardon, over 60 years old, anyone who is physically or mentally impaired, or a woman who is pregnant at the time of the accusation, or if the accusation leads to other offenses involving more than one person, or if the accusation leads to the death of an individual, or results in direct or indirect acts of violence, threats, harassment, or intimidation towards any other person, or results in the destruction of property, is guilty of an offense punishable by up to life in prison. My fellow members of this honorable House, our primary duty is to protect the rights of our most vulnerable citizens. The glassmen are con artists and cowards. They prey on the vulnerable and the weak members of our society. We have a moral duty to protect these vulnerable citizens who deserve the protection of our laws. We cannot call ourselves a Christian nation when acts of torture and violence are regularly used against innocent widows, old women, and girls as young as 5 years old, and tortured by an entire community on the words of a con artist posing as a glass man or glass Mary. Our country is only as good as the protection we can provide to those who are most vulnerable. On behalf of our chair, the Honourable Charles Abel, MP, I wish to thank all those who work tirelessly in this space and who are responsible for bringing this legislation to the House. I wish to thank particularly the Tribal Foundation and its members. I now ask my fellow members of this Honourable Parliament to vote for the passage of these amendments to the Criminal Code Act, addressing sorcery, accusation-related violence by criminalizing the act of acting as a glassman or glassmary, and the use of glassman or glassmary and other related acts. In this life, we are sometimes given an opportunity to do great things that will make us proud. This bill is one of those things we can all be proud of doing together. This bill is a first step towards eliminating these vile and cowardly acts in our society. Let us send a message to the cowards that we do not tolerate this kind of behavior. And in the same voice, let us give hope to widows, women and girls, people with disability, defenseless men and girls who may become victims in the future. Mr. Speaker, it is with great honor that I commend this bill to the House.
You got question be put, finished, but I will allow debate on this, or I will ask the honourable member for Alatau.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to wholeheartedly put my support behind this proposed legislation. And I also rise, of course, on behalf of the Special Committee on Gender-Based Violence, as its chairman, to thank the Governor, Alan Bird, who, of course, is our Deputy Chairman and one of the champions in this cause. And today is an example of him standing up and being that champion again. Of course, I must also mention Governor Powers Pakop, who is also a member of our committee, who is another champion in this cause. As you know, initiated the process, a work started by many others before our time. But this gentleman, or these two gentlemen, but in particular Governor Pakop, with the convening of the summit last year, leading to various outcomes, including the establishment of the Coalition of Parliamentarians on Gender-Based Violence, and of course the establishment through this government of the Special Parliamentary Committee on Gender-Based Violence, Mr. Speaker. And so we, through this committee, through these various groups and the good leaders, including all the other members of the coalition and this Special Parliamentary Committee, have begun a process and a work. And again, I thank the Prime Minister. I thank this government for recognising this issue, for creating this Parliamentary Committee, for giving me the privilege and the opportunity, together with this team, to try and do something about this important issue that obviously we, as the Governor is saying, seeing all too often this situation happening. And Mr. Speaker, it is so frightening that it is even extending down to touching our children. And in particular in this aspect of GBV, in sorcery-related, sorcery accusation-related violence, it's going as far now as to the torture of children that may be related somehow to the initial accusation. And I have a particular reference to that again we come back and thank people like Tribal Foundation who have helped to initiate this legislation and to formulate it, but many, many good people on the front line that are undertaking this work. But I just want to mention a particular name because Tribal Foundation, through Gary Buston and Ruth Kissam and the staff there, work on such cases like the case of 7-year-old Angeline Andrew last year. She was tortured for 3 years. 3 years, broke most of the bones in her body, burnt her lips, her genitals, and the pain inflicted on this poor girl was unbelievable. But even subsequent to that, the arrest of the particular perpetrator, who was a relative, an auntie, and the release of that person, despite massive evidence, adds to this concern and this issue that we're talking about, and all the various requirements that need to be done to address it. But Mr. Speaker, as you know, the Parliamentary Committee tabled a comprehensive report here on the floor, and we listed 71 recommendations in there. And as I mentioned, this is part of a broader range of initiatives that we have recommended and indeed have been endorsed by this Parliament. And within those 71 recommendations in that report endorsed by the government, I just touch on the 7 major issues that are elevated in the executive summary as ones that needing immediate addressing by Parliament. The first one being the establishment of a permanent GBV committee to convert this special parliamentary committee into a permanent committee going forward so that this momentum, this work doesn't stop. And I just want to inform the House that I have written to and given the draft resolution to the Leader of Government Business to possibly bring that resolution or that motion to the floor so that we can support and make this parliamentary committee into a permanent committee. And I trust that Leader of Government Business who has responded to that can action that. The other one we mentioned, of course, is the establishment of a national GBV secretariat. And again, thanks to the government, thanks to the Treasurer, who testified at the parliamentary hearings that 7 million kina has been provided in this year's budget towards that, although we asked for a PIP and that has been provided certainly in the first instance, so that is also progressing. The third one is the sorcery accusation-related violence issue that we are touching on now. And we say here that the SAV, or the Sorcery Accusation-Related Violence National Action Plan, SNAP, should be resourced in order to address the worrying increase of SAV cases around the country. In addition, specific examination should be given to the role of glassmen or glassmeri in inciting SAV cases to identify whether law reform is necessary and to address the lack of prosecution of SAV cases and of glassmeri. So those are contained in recommendations 25 to 30, and this is a progression of that particular issue thanks to our Governor. The other matters in these 7 elevated issues are counselling services, support for family planning, and then access to justice. And the last one is the reserve seats for women issue that the Prime Minister himself has made several pronouncements about that. As we look at Boundaries Commission reports and so on, I think we're running a little bit late on that issue, but certainly that is something also picked up in the report. Mr. Speaker, in relation to the incidents and the involvement of Glassman and Glassmeri, I just want to highlight the reference to the issues paper by the National Research Institute that underlines we are not just talking in the blue here. We have relied on research and analysis that shows quite clearly that there is Glassman and Glassmeri were associated in all areas of PNG where the research was conducted in terms of sorcery accusation-related violence. And in fact, 29%, it's higher in some parts of the country, lower in others, but almost a third of the cases involved Glassman and Glassmeri, according to this report. The other one is, of course, the profit motive that the Governor refers to, and that's why these things are captured specifically in the Act, because the advent of this particular matter is driven by economic reasons as well. A lot of these people are coming into areas like the Highlands where don't have this as part of their tradition and utilizing it as a way of making money. And then these things accuse innocent, particularly old ladies and children, and take advantage of them in order to make money. So, Mr. Speaker, we have provisions in the law already in the criminal code relating to the criminal offence of sorcery-related violence, but it's been very necessary to bring this additional amendment to the criminal code to target this particular issue, and these things have arisen through the comprehensive process of a parliamentary inquiry to identify what are the specific issues, and I've highlighted them in the report already. So, Mr. Speaker, I understand that the Parliament will see this issue. I know the Parliament is sympathetic, this government is sympathetic to the issue, and so I trust that we will all support this amendment wholeheartedly. And again, as Chairman of the Parliamentary Committee, I thank the committee and I thank Governor for progressing this issue and as we continue to highlight it. But Mr. Speaker, so much more remains to be done. And this legislation and our work is dedicated to all these victims. It's dedicated to those women and children that even today are suffering at the hands of mainly we menfolk. And I say it and I say it again, and the Governor has said it. If you perpetrate such things on these innocent children and innocent women, you are a coward. And this is not our culture. This is something that has come in, is introduced from somewhere. People are taking opportunity of it, and it is un-Christian, and it is definitely not Papua New Guinean culture. So, Mr. Speaker, let us continue this good work. Let us not allow it to slip below the radar. And I sincerely hope that in the next Parliament, the work of this committee continues through a permanent parliamentary committee. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we're making short talk, that's all. Me like number one talk, thank you, Law. Committee, only sit down, bung, all members of Parliament, also Governor Bedemiet, the Honorable Charles Abel, member of Longalatau, Governor Pakop, and a body of leaders get together and work, respond to this what was growing issue where Tok Lo Sanguman, Tok Lo Abisim or Pikini Mary, now Mary blow country blame he go big pla. And this work only starting blow gender-based violence, look inside, come now you may join long pass him. Talk stop him. Talk long sorcery, accusation, this I think I'm timely. You got enough law stop ground now. You looking you got an allegation law, one something go lo court so. You don't need lo hot him wire na. Talk him Sanguma Mary na kind of say make him at in this law parliament. He saw him maturity. Mila comment in Parliament too, or sit down right through. Now you may bring him to private members, business come up here, or you may pass in law. On our side of this house, now me looking Senate long, Honorable Member of Long Alatao, me looking Senate long, Honorable Member of Sala, Parliament upside, this side, me plus sit down. I think every time you may all gonna rise up. You may all picking man, blow this country, must secure safety, blow picking Mary, blow you me into the future. No can live under threat, long possible intimidation all the time. We cannot be the richest black Christian nation. We cannot be happy, wealthy, and wise. As Somare talk law 2009, Somare under leadership law. Sepuka talk law 2009 underneath law Vision 2050. Or you may not have this country of equal opportunity for all, where all Papa law country put him long 1975. Talk long 5 plan law this country. And so I think you may look how a problem is stopped now this parliament and we step up and like addressing one problem. Long put him law in place. But me ask him what instrumentality long and this long me play up in penalty. Some black country or some Singapore, suppose you go, Mr. Speaker, you clear. You throw my massive sleep or you throw my little long Singapore. I think 10-year, 20-year imprisonment. You make this parliament is so him responsibly in the concern long up in penalty, long abuse, long picking Mary, and abuse law society. Me comment him this law. On our side, you may send up give him good support law and good law. All brothers law committee only bring him go. Come back side long private members where Governor Betty bring him come to. So I mean one good time in the sunset of this parliament. As we close in 10 parliament in few weeks time. Some blood is good law and a good law pointer towards 11 parliament and beyond. As to why or how but you may stop walk give him safety along all the most vulnerable amongst us and all picking Mary and all Mary in our community. So thank you again to the committee who made this bill come to pass through the work that you put in earlier. We thank many supporting advisors and hands behind the scene to have made it possible. Our government on this side give total support to this bill before us, and I commend the bill also to the House.
So the question is that the question be now put. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. The question is that the bill be now read a second time. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. Mr. Clerk.
Second reading. A bill for an act to amend the Criminal Code Act, Chapter 262, and for related purposes.
Member for East Civic Provincial.
Mr. Speaker, I ask leave of the Parliament to move the third reading forthwith.
Is leave granted? Leave granted. Member for East Civic Provincial.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill be now read a third time.
The question is that the question be now put. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. The question is that the bill be now read a third time. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. Mr. Clerk.
Third reading. A bill for an act to amend the Criminal Code Act, Chapter 262, and for related purposes.
No, this one.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, it's leave of Parliament to move a motion without notice.
Is leave granted? Leave granted. Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I move that so much of the standing orders be suspended as would prevent notice number 286, 287, 296, and 297. Government business being called forthwith.
Question is that the motion be agreed to. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. Mr. Clerk.
Notice number 286, Prime Minister and Minister for Bougainville Affairs.
Mr. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I present the Organic Law on the Duties and Responsibilities of Leadership, Amendment Law 2021.
Mr. Clerk.
First reading, a proposed law to amend the Organic Law on the Duties and Responsibilities of Leadership.
In accordance with Standing Order 222AA and the practice of Parliament, the proposed law now stands referred to the Permanent Parliamentary Committee on Constitutional Laws and Acts and Subordinate Legislation. Mr. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in accordance with Standing Order 222B, I now commence the first required opportunity for debate.
Make your speech.
Mr. Speaker, I thank you for giving me this opportunity one more time. There are 10 amendments presented in this Organic Law Bill, which enables the Ombudsman Commission to conduct investigations into leadership code breaches. The amendments are proposed for sections 1, 4, 17, 22, 31, 32, 33, and 35. This includes definitions of national enterprises in relation to different categories of business entities, recognition that certain offenses may be fined only and not referred to the leadership tribunal, and the quantum of fines thereof, creating an obligation for consultations with all members of the Commission rather than just the Chief Ombudsman, creating fines for different minor offenses within an investigation phase instead of processing all of them to tribunal, and protections of officers of the Ombudsman Commission, etc., etc. Mr. Speaker, amongst these amendments are also two new sections inserted. This includes new section 17A, which created procedures for the meetings of Commission and provides clarity in the administrative procedures and decision-making during a meeting of the Commission, and the new section 17B, strengthening the concept of secrecy of the work of the Commission. The objective of these amendments and inclusion of new sections in the organic law is mainly to ensure deterrence and compliance of the Leadership Code by those whose conducts are subject to its operation. Similarly to the organic law on the Ombudsman Commission, this organic law, which primarily looks into the conduct of public officials, public office holders, needs to be improved further to enable a more robust and effective complaints handling process to the Commission and to ensure compliance and deterrence is fostered in its operation as legislation that is important to fight against corruption in our country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question is that the question be now put. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. Honourable members, as this is the first vote, the Constitution requires that the vote must be recorded, and that in order for the proposed law to pass, it must also be supported by a two-thirds absolute majority of 74 members. Honourable members, the Parliament will now vote. Clerk, please ring the bells. Attendants, close the doors. The question is that the proposed law without amendments be now agreed to. Those in favor, please stand. Those against, please stand. Honorable members, the result of the votes, the ayes 70 and the noes 1. You may not meet him constitutional requirement. Honorable Leader of the Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the votes on the amendments be rescinded. Thank you.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. Mr. Clerk,
Notice number 297, Prime Minister and Minister for Bougainville Affairs.
Mr. Prime Minister,
Mr. Speaker, I present the Leadership Code Alternative Penalties Amendment Bill 2021.
Mr. Clerk,
First reading, a bill for an act to amend the Leadership Code Alternative Penalties Act, Chapter 1A. Chapter 1A.
Mr. Prime Minister,
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill be now read a second time.
make your speech.
Mr. Speaker, let me thank you once again for giving me an opportunity to present the amendment bill on the Leadership Code, the Alternate Penalties Act. Mr. Speaker, before I make a speech on this specific bill, let me say thank you to the 70 and the one, of course, who's in the House to have the opportunity to go over the earlier bills that were presented. You know, many times we talk about the Ombudsman Commission and those that come within its midst. These are reforms that are geared towards strengthening. For instance, the earlier bill that we withdrew again talks about, instead of just allowing the bill to be in the function of Ombudsman to be personalized on one or two commissioners, we're trying to modernize it so it all is working in tandem, and it's an institution that is functioning instead of one or two running their place. And the other bill that we have is to give there's one amendment within that contains limitations to the tenureship. Instead of having opportunity for someone to be there for a long time, we're limiting it to only 2 terms to be served in a position they occupy in this important constitutional office. So a reform that is aimed towards modernizing the Leadership Code. I'll give credit also where it is due. In the original Alata Accord 1, this was also mooted then, and it has come through many processes. And as we speak today, we thought that these are relevant laws to revitalize the Ombudsman Commission, which is a key institution that stands at the watch of fighting corruption. Another amendment that is part of the series of amendment was to bring in those who are responsible over billions of kina in the state-owned enterprises, the Kumul Petroleums, the Kumul Minings, and all to be under the ambit of the Leadership Code. And it was in this context that these reforms are coming through. I ask all members of Parliament to also go through the amendments proposed that has been the draft bills that has been circulated to the respective offices. But in this instance now, for this Leadership Code Alternative Penalties Amendment, this bill proposed to complement the Constitution Section 31 on an alternate penalty for a leader who has been found guilty, where the penalty is other than dismissal. Over the years, implementation of Section 31 over the years of implementing Section 31 of the Constitution, I beg your pardon, it has become clear that there are some offenses that should only attract a fine rather than a harsher penalty. This proposal provides an option for the fines to be administratively imposed so that we avoid very expensive inquiries which may result in just fines being imposed. It addresses both the interests of the state as well as the interests of the leader for those determined to be made upfront. Mr. Speaker, the amendments presented in this bill are for the increase in the monetary fines that a leadership tribunal may impose on the cases that do not attract dismissal. The Ombudsman Commission is confident that the proposed increases in the fines will also ensure deterrence and compliance to those who are subject to the Leadership Code. Mr. Speaker, on this I propose this amendment to the House.
The question is that question. Honourable Member Esala.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to lend my support to this particular bill, and I speak on behalf of the judiciary, who has expressed on several occasions through cases that have reviewed the work of the leadership tribunals where our judges have asked for a review of this particular legislation, which is intended to increase the amount of fine that is to be imposed when a leader is found guilty. I say this with a sense of respect to this honorable House and the work of the judiciary, because in my former life, I know I've represented certain leaders who are also still here, who were found guilty and were fined only 1,000 kina, which is contrary to the expectation of our community out there at large. And so this is a timely amendment, and it obviously should be supported. The only regret, Mr. Speaker, is that the amount to be imposed should be increased. And I say this in light of the fact that oftentimes the leadership challenge or leadership charges that we face or leaders face following a extensive investigation involves big sums of money, and in the absence of the unexplained wealth legislation, which is one of the legislations that was promised by this government, in the absence of that particular legislation, the penalty ought to have been a little bit more than what is being recommended here, which is 10,000 kina. Otherwise, Mr. Speaker, I support this particular amendment. Thank you.
The question is that the question be now put. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. The question is that the bill be now read a second time. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. Mr. Clerk.
Second reading, a bill for an act to amend the Leadership Code, Alternative Penalties Act, Chapter 1A.
Mr. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I ask Labour Parliament to move the third reading forward, please.
Is leave granted? Leave granted, Mr. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill now be read a third time, please.
The question is that the question be now put. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those against say no. The ayes have it. The question is that the bill be now read a third time. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those against say no. The ayes have it. Mr. Clerk.
Third reading, a bill for an act to amend the Leadership Code, Alternative Penalties Act, Chapter 1A.
I'll not let me withdraw. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank members of this Honourable House, members on this side of the House, including members of our leaders on that side of the House. I think we've passed critical bills dealing with issues to do with church, religion, to gender-based violence, and the work done by most of those committees. I want to place on record from Government Business, I think we had passage of two critical private member bills done by committee work, and I put on record the committees that are existing in Parliament, and some of the committees have really stepped up, and one we saw a bill being passed, so me put them on record. The work that committees are also important to the running of Parliament. Also on that, Mr. Speaker, me thank him. A few leaders who sat through, some of our senior members on this House who have been sitting through for this 1 week as well. I understand, we're nearing elections time, but that doesn't stop us from functioning as a government, whether we sit on which side of the House, and I thank members. We don't take them for granted for their support on Government Business as well. With that, Mr. Speaker, I may move on some emerging in Parliament go tomorrow, 10 a.m. Thank you.
Question is that the motion be agreed to. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. Parliament is now adjourned to 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.